Welcome back to Unheard Stories. Before we dive into today's story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel and connect people all over the world. Now, imagine this. You're expecting one of the happiest moments of your life. You've spent months preparing, building dreams, and counting down the days to meet your first child. But in one devastating moment, your world crumbles. The person you trusted most reveals a betrayal so shocking that it changes everything. Today we're diving into Evan's story, a man whose life was turned upside down the day his wife gave birth to a child that wasn't his. This isn't just a story of heartbreak, it's a story of revenge, strength, and ultimately freedom. Stay tuned because this one will leave you questioning everything you think you know about trust and betrayal. Evan Mitchell was a man of structure, a man of commitment. At 33, he had built a solid career as a project manager at a tech firm, earning a reputation for his meticulous planning and reliability. His life outside work mirrored his personality, neat, organized, and full of hope. After 5 years of marriage, Evan was on the cusp of a dream he'd held close to his heart, becoming a father. Every morning, Evan would wake early, brew a strong cup of coffee, and lace up his running shoes for a jog around the neighborhood. It was his way of staying grounded. As he jogged past their quiet suburban home with its neatly trimmed lawn, he'd smile, imagining the day when a child's laughter would echo in those halls. Evan was the kind of man who would spend hours researching the safest car seats, assembling nursery furniture with precision, and daydreaming about family trips to the zoo. Leah, his wife, was his opposite in many ways. At 31, she was vibrant, spontaneous, and loved to be the center of attention. Her infectious laugh and easy charm were what had drawn Evan to her in the first place. She worked part-time as a graphic designer, but most of her energy seemed to go into maintaining her social image, planning Instagram-worthy brunches, curating perfect vacation photos, and keeping up appearances in their tight-knit community. To the outside world, Evan and Leah were the picture-perfect couple. They hosted barbecues for neighbors, attended local charity events, and posted glowing updates about their life together on social media. But behind the curated facade, cracks were beginning to form. Leah's recent behavior had been puzzling. She'd grown distant, often distracted during their conversations. She'd started making frequent trips out of town, always citing work as the reason. "The client has a last-minute project," she'd say with a casual shrug, brushing off Evan's questions. Evan, ever trusting, believed her. Why wouldn't he? Leah had never given him a reason to doubt her, or so he thought. As the months passed, Leah's pregnancy became the centerpiece of their lives. Evan threw himself into the role of the supportive husband. He attended every doctor's appointment, signed them up for birthing classes, and spent countless hours researching the best baby gear. Leah, on the other hand, seemed less enthusiastic than Evan expected. While she participated in the preparations, there was an unspoken tension in her demeanor, something Evan chalked up to nerves or hormones. Evan's desire to be a father was his driving force. He had dreams of teaching his child how to ride a bike, reading bedtime stories, and being the kind of dad who showed up for every soccer game and school recital. Leah, though, seemed more interested in planning her elaborate baby shower than imagining the life they were about to bring into the world. Unbeknownst to Evan, Leah's distractions weren't just about work or pregnancy stress. She was hiding something that would turn their idyllic life into a storm of betrayal and heartbreak. Evan believed their love was unshakable. He believed Leah was his partner in every sense of the word. What he didn't know was that Leah had made choices that would shatter those beliefs forever. And as their due date approached, the web of lies Leah had spun was about to unravel in the most devastating way. It was a crisp Thursday afternoon when Evan received the message that would change his life forever. He was sitting at his desk, immersed in project updates, when his phone buzzed. The notification glowed on the screen: "Baby's here. Room 204, St. Mary's Hospital. Can't wait for you to meet your little one. Leah." His heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. Months of anticipation and preparation had led to this. Without a second thought, Evan grabbed his coat and practically ran out of the office. His colleagues cheered him on, shouting congratulations as he rushed to the elevator. On the drive to the hospital, Evan's mind raced with excitement. He thought about the nights he and Leah had spent picking out names, their playful arguments over whether the baby would take after him or her, and the afternoons he'd spent painting the nursery a soft, sunny yellow. Everything about this moment felt surreal. He couldn't wait to hold his child, to see Leah, and to start the new chapter of their lives together. When Evan arrived at the hospital, he was greeted by the familiar scent of antiseptic and the bustling sounds of nurses and visitors. Clutching the small teddy bear he'd picked up weeks ago, he headed straight for room 204. He couldn't wipe the smile off his face as he imagined Leah holding their baby for the first time. But as he turned the corner, he saw someone unexpected. Margot, Leah's mother, standing stiffly outside the room. Margot's usual warm smile was replaced with a tight, almost panicked expression. She stepped forward as Evan approached, blocking the door with a shaky hand on his chest. "Evan," she began, her voice strained. "Maybe you should wait out here for a minute?" The smile faltered on Evan's face. "Why? Is everything okay? Is Leah okay? The baby?" "It's complicated," Margot said, her eyes darting away. "Leah just needs a moment." Evan frowned, confusion turning to unease. "Margot, what's going on?" "I'm her husband. That's my child in there. I have every right to go in." "Evan, please," she started, but he brushed past her, his determination outweighing her feeble protests. When he stepped into the room, his world tilted on its axis. Leah was sitting on the hospital bed, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in soft white blankets. At first glance, it was exactly the scene Evan had imagined. But as he stepped closer, the illusion shattered. The baby had beautiful caramel-toned skin, a stark contrast to Evan's fair complexion and Leah's light features. He froze, the teddy bear slipping from his hand and landing on the floor with a soft thud. The pieces fell into place in an instant, each realization hitting him like a blow to the chest. "Evan," Leah said softly, her voice trembling. She held the baby closer, her eyes brimming with tears. "I can explain." "Explain?" Evan's voice cracked. He took a step back, shaking his head as if trying to wake himself from a nightmare. "What exactly are you going to explain, Leah? How this baby, our baby, isn't mine?" Leah's tears spilled over, but Evan didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. He could barely breathe, the weight of her betrayal crushing him. "Who is he?" Evan demanded, his voice rising. "Who is the father, Leah?" Margot stepped into the room then, her face pale and drawn. "Evan, please lower your voice. This isn't the place." "Don't you dare tell me what to do," Evan snapped, his anger now boiling over. "You knew, didn't you? That's why you were out there trying to stop me from coming in. How long have you known?" "I found out when the baby was born," Margot admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to find out like this." Evan laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. "Oh, so this is about sparing my feelings now? Where was this concern when Leah was sleeping with someone else? Where was this protection then?" Leah sobbed, clutching the baby tightly as if to shield herself. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Evan. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." "Mistake?" Evan's voice was icy. "Getting the wrong coffee order is a mistake. Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. But this? This wasn't a mistake, Leah. This was a choice. Every single time you decided to lie to me, you made a choice." The baby stirred, its soft cries punctuating the tense silence. Leah looked down, shushing the infant gently, but Evan felt no connection to the scene in front of him. The future he had imagined, the child he had dreamed of raising, was gone, replaced by the cold, undeniable truth. "You lied to me," Evan said, his voice quieter now but no less cutting. "You were going to let me believe this child was mine. You were going to let me raise it, love it, while keeping this secret from me? What kind of person does that?" Leah looked up at him, desperation in her eyes. "I was scared, Evan. I didn't want to lose you." "Well, congratulations," Evan said, his tone bitter. "You just did." He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Leah's sobs and the baby's cries behind him. As he made his way through the hospital corridor, the walls seemed to close in around him. The life he had known was gone, shattered in a matter of moments. Evan reached his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The stuffed bear sat on the passenger seat, a cruel reminder of the future he had lost. He closed his eyes, his chest heaving as he tried to process the betrayal. One thing was clear, this wasn't over. Leah might have destroyed his trust, but Evan wasn't going to let her destroy his future. Evan sat in his car, the events at the hospital replaying in his mind like a broken record. His chest felt heavy with anger, betrayal, and disbelief. The love of his life had shattered his world, and he wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. Leah had made her choices and now it was time for him to make his. He didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove aimlessly, letting the cool night air clear his mind. As anger gave way to clarity, a plan began to take shape. Leah hadn't just betrayed their marriage, she had tried to deceive him into claiming a child that wasn't his. That wasn't a mistake, it was calculated fraud, and he would make sure she faced the consequences. The next morning, Evan made 2 calls. The first was to his close friend and colleague, Max. Max had always been the one Evan turned to for advice, and this situation was no exception. "Max," Evan began, his voice steady but laced with anger, "I need a lawyer. A good one." Max didn't ask questions. "I know someone. James Carter. He's sharp, ruthless, and exactly who you need. I'll text you his info." The second call was to the law office of James Carter. Within minutes, Evan had an appointment scheduled for that afternoon. He wasn't wasting any time. James Carter was everything Max had promised, a no-nonsense attorney with decades of experience in family law. As Evan sat across from him in the sleek, minimalist office, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since the betrayal. "Start from the beginning," James said, leaning forward with a legal pad in hand. "Leave nothing out." Evan recounted everything: the pregnancy, the baby, the hospital confrontation, and Leah's desperate attempts to justify her actions. By the time he finished, James's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp with focus. "Here's what we're going to do," James said, his tone calm but firm. "First, we'll request a DNA test to confirm non-paternity. While the physical evidence, namely the baby's appearance, is compelling, we need concrete proof for the courts. Once we have that, we'll file for divorce and include charges of paternity fraud." Evan nodded. "What about the birth certificate? Leah hinted that she might put my name on it anyway." James's mouth tightened into a thin line. "If she does that, we'll file a fraud complaint. Falsifying a legal document is a serious offense, and it will only strengthen our case." "What about the biological father?" Evan asked, his voice hard. "Shouldn't he be responsible?" "If we can identify him, we'll include him in the proceedings," James replied. "But from what you've told me, Leah has been evasive about his identity. We may need to dig deeper." As the meeting ended, Evan left with a clear plan and a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let Leah manipulate him any further. This wasn't just about protecting himself, it was about reclaiming his life. Over the next few days, Evan threw himself into gathering evidence. He went through Leah's laptop, which she had carelessly left unlocked in her home office. What he found only deepened his resolve. Emails between Leah and a man named Carter revealed the extent of their relationship. The messages were explicit, detailing not only their affair but also their plans to keep Evan in the dark. One email in particular made Evan's blood boil. "Evan doesn't suspect a thing. Once the baby is born, I'll handle the birth certificate. He'll never know." Evan printed every email, screenshot every message, and saved them to a secure drive. He also documented every interaction with Leah, including the dozens of texts and calls she had sent since the hospital confrontation. Her messages ranged from tearful apologies to desperate pleas, all of which Evan ignored. The breaking point came when Leah showed up at his office unannounced. She looked disheveled, her usual confident demeanor replaced with frantic desperation. "Evan, please," she begged, blocking the doorway to his office. "Can we just talk? You can't ignore me forever." Evan stood his ground, his voice cold. "I've said everything I need to say, Leah. If you have anything to discuss, you can do it through my lawyer." Her face crumpled, but Evan didn't waver. He had made the mistake of trusting her once. He wouldn't make it again. Weeks later, the DNA results arrived, confirming what Evan already knew: there was zero chance the baby was his. Armed with this evidence, James filed for divorce and submitted the paternity fraud claim. The court date was set, and Evan braced himself for the confrontation. The courtroom was tense as the case unfolded. Leah's attorney, a sharp but visibly overwhelmed woman, tried to paint Leah as a victim of circumstance. She claimed Leah had acted out of fear and desperation, not malice. James, however, was relentless. He presented the DNA results, the incriminating emails, and testimony from hospital staff who had witnessed Leah's attempts to file the birth certificate without Evan's consent. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of Leah's deceit. When Leah took the stand, her tears flowed freely as she recounted the difficulties of her pregnancy and her fear of losing Evan. But James's cross-examination was brutal. "You claim you acted out of fear," James said, his voice calm but sharp. "Yet these emails show months of premeditated deception. You weren't afraid, Mrs. Mitchell, you were calculating." Leah had no response. Her tears fell, but they didn't sway the judge, who ruled decisively in Evan's favor. The divorce was granted, the fraud charges upheld, and Leah was ordered to pay a hefty fine along with community service. The court also ruled that Evan had no legal or financial responsibility for the child. Throughout the proceedings, the identity of the biological father remained a mystery. Leah refused to name him, but the emails provided enough clues for James's team to track him down. Carter, as it turned out, was a co-worker of Leah's, a man who had conveniently transferred to another branch shortly before the baby was born. When contacted, Carter admitted to the affair but denied any intention of being involved. "I told Leah from the beginning that I didn't want kids," he said, his tone dismissive. "This isn't my problem." Evan felt a surge of anger at Carter's cavalier attitude, but he didn't dwell on it. Carter's refusal to step up only reinforced Evan's decision to cut ties completely. He had done nothing to deserve this mess, and he wasn't going to carry the burden of someone else's mistakes. With the legal battle behind him, Evan began to rebuild his life. He sold the house he and Leah had shared, unable to bear the memories it held, and moved into a sleek downtown apartment. He threw himself into his work, earning a promotion that kept him busy and gave him a sense of purpose. For Evan, the betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a turning point. He had learned the hard way that trust could be fragile, but he also discovered his own strength. Leah's deceit had broken his heart, but it hadn't broken him. The days after the courtroom victory were strangely quiet for Evan. The adrenaline that had fueled his fight against Leah began to fade, leaving behind a hollow ache. Winning the case had given him closure on paper, but emotionally the wounds ran deep. Evan returned to the downtown apartment he'd recently moved into. The space was modern, minimalist, and completely devoid of memories tied to Leah. He'd chosen it deliberately, a blank slate where he could rebuild his life without constant reminders of the betrayal. But even in this new environment, the weight of what he had lost lingered. Every time he saw a young family on the street, every time he passed a toy store, every time he heard a baby's cry in the distance, a pang of sorrow hit him. He had spent months preparing for fatherhood, imagining the joys of raising a child. Now, all of that had been stripped away, leaving behind an emptiness he didn't know how to fill. For weeks, Evan kept to himself, throwing all his energy into his work. The promotion he had received was demanding, which suited him just fine. Late nights at the office meant fewer hours spent alone with his thoughts. But avoidance wasn't a solution, and Evan knew it. One evening, as he sat in his apartment with a glass of whiskey in hand, he finally allowed himself to confront the emotions he'd been pushing aside. The anger, the heartbreak, the sense of betrayal, all of it came crashing down. He thought about how Leah had looked at him, tears streaming down her face, and he wondered how someone he'd loved so deeply could have hurt him so profoundly. It wasn't just the affair that stung, it was the lies, the manipulation, and the way she had tried to trap him into a life built on deceit. Evan had trusted Leah implicitly, and she had taken that trust and shattered it without a second thought. The next day, Evan reached out to his friend Max. "I can't keep this bottled up anymore," he admitted. "I need to talk to someone." Max, ever the problem solver, suggested therapy. At first, the idea made Evan uncomfortable. He wasn't sure he wanted to pour his heart out to a stranger. But after some convincing, he booked an appointment with a counselor who specialized in helping people navigate betrayal and trauma. Therapy turned out to be exactly what Evan needed. In the quiet, safe space of the counselor's office, he began unpacking the emotions he'd buried for so long. He learned to stop blaming himself for Leah's choices and to recognize the strength it had taken to stand up for himself in the face of her deceit. "You can't control what other people do," the therapist told him during one session. "But you can control how you respond. And you've already taken the first step by refusing to let her actions define your future." With time, Evan began to emerge from the fog of heartbreak. He reconnected with friends he hadn't seen in months, joining them for dinners, hikes, and weekend get-togethers. For the first time in what felt like forever, he laughed without forcing it, the weight on his chest beginning to lift. He also rediscovered hobbies he had long forgotten. As a teenager, Evan had loved photography, spending hours wandering through his neighborhood with a camera slung around his neck. He dug out his old DSLR from storage and began exploring the city, capturing its vibrant energy through his lens. Photography became a form of therapy for him, a way to focus on the beauty around him instead of the pain within. Through his journey of healing, Evan came to realize something profound. Leah's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had also given him a gift. It had forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities, to set boundaries, and to demand more from the people in his life. He had always been the type to give endlessly, to bend over backward to make others happy. But Leah's actions had taught him the importance of protecting himself and prioritizing his own well-being. Evan also began to view his future through a new lens. For so long, he had tied his happiness to the idea of starting a family with Leah. But now, he saw that his happiness didn't have to depend on anyone else. He could create a fulfilling life on his own terms, one that wasn't defined by someone else's choices. One Saturday, while photographing the skyline at a local park, Evan struck up a conversation with a woman who was also taking photos. Her name was Claire, and she had an easy laugh and a warmth that made Evan feel at ease. They spent the afternoon chatting about their favorite photography spots, and by the time they parted ways, Claire had given Evan her number. It wasn't a grand, romantic moment, but it was something that made Evan realize he was ready to open himself up to new possibilities. Despite the progress he'd made, there were still moments when the past threatened to pull Evan back. Every so often, Leah would send him a message apologizing or asking if they could meet to talk. Evan never responded. He had made his peace with what had happened, but he wasn't interested in reopening old wounds. One day, Leah's name popped up on his phone again. This time the message read, "I'm sorry for everything. I know it's too late, but I hope you find happiness. You deserve it." Evan stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting the message. It wasn't anger that drove his decision, it was clarity. Leah's words couldn't undo the damage she had caused, and Evan no longer needed her apologies to move forward. He had built a new life for himself, one free from the lies and betrayals of the past. As the months turned into a year, Evan found himself smiling more, laughing more, and waking up each morning with a sense of purpose. He had rebuilt his life brick by brick, finding strength in his independence and joy in the simple things. Whether it was a sunrise over the city, a quiet evening with friends, or a successful project at work, Evan learned to appreciate the beauty in the everyday. And while he wasn't sure what the future held, one thing was certain. He would never again settle for less than he deserved. The courtroom victory had marked a turning point in Evan's life, but true closure didn't come until much later. It wasn't about the court ruling, the DNA test, or even Leah's eventual silence. It was about the quiet realization that he was finally free. Evan stood on the balcony of his downtown apartment one evening, watching the city lights twinkle against the dark sky. The air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of traffic below. This was his sanctuary now, a space filled not with memories of betrayal but with the promise of new beginnings. The sleek furniture, the vibrant photography prints on the walls, and the absence of anything tied to his past with Leah were all reminders that he had rebuilt his life from the ground up. After the divorce was finalized, Evan had ensured there were no lingering ties to Leah. She had attempted to reach out a few more times, sending messages that oscillated between apologetic and defensive. Each one felt like a tug at an old wound, but Evan never responded. He wasn't ignoring her out of spite, he simply knew that engaging would serve no purpose. The last message she sent came months after the court case. "I hope you find happiness, Evan. I'm truly sorry for everything." This time, Evan didn't feel anger or pain. He felt nothing. And that was how he knew he was ready to let go. He deleted the message and moved on, leaving the past where it belonged. Evan had always been a planner, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to embrace the unexpected. Photography became more than a hobby, it became a passion. He spent weekends exploring the city, capturing everything from bustling markets to serene parks. The act of framing a perfect shot reminded him of life's fleeting beauty and taught him to focus on the present. His work life thrived as well. The promotion he had received during the chaos with Leah had turned into a fulfilling role. Evan excelled at leading his team, finding satisfaction in mentoring younger colleagues and tackling challenging projects. For the first time in years, his achievements felt like they were truly his own, not part of a shared life but a reflection of his individual strength and determination. It was during one of his photography outings that Evan met Claire again. They had exchanged numbers months earlier after a chance encounter, but life had kept them busy. When Claire reached out to invite him to a photography exhibit, Evan hesitated for only a moment before saying yes. The exhibit was in a cozy gallery tucked away in the Arts District. As they walked through the space, discussing the intricate details of the photographs on display, Evan found himself laughing easily. Claire had a warmth and authenticity that felt like a breath of fresh air. Over the following weeks, their friendship blossomed into something more. Claire was different from Leah in every way that mattered. She didn't need grand gestures or constant validation. She simply enjoyed being present in the moment, sharing her thoughts and dreams with Evan as they explored the city together. One evening as they sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Claire turned to Evan and asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive her for what she did?" Evan considered the question carefully. "I don't think forgiveness is about excusing what happened," he said finally. "It's about letting go of the anger so it doesn't control you. I've done that. I've let go. But forgiving her? I don't know if that's something I'll ever fully do, and I'm okay with that." Claire nodded, her hand resting lightly on his. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, you know. Evan smiled. I don't know about that. I just know I'm not the same person I was a year ago. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. As time went on, Evan realized he had not only survived Leah's betrayal but had grown because of it. The man who had once defined himself by his marriage and dreams of fatherhood had discovered his own strength and resilience. He had learned to set boundaries, to prioritize his own happiness, and to embrace the uncertainty of life. One day, as he sorted through old photos, he came across an album from his wedding. The pictures showed a version of himself he barely recognized, a man smiling brightly, unaware of the storm that lay ahead. Evan closed the album and set it aside. That chapter of his life was over, and he had no desire to revisit it. Evan's story didn't end with revenge or heartbreak, it ended with hope. He had built a life that was truly his own, filled with passion, purpose, and the promise of new adventures. Whether it was exploring a new city with Claire, leading his team at work, or capturing the perfect shot with his camera, Evan found joy in the little things that made life worth living. As he stood on his balcony that evening watching the world go by, Evan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The betrayal that had once defined him was now just a memory, a lesson in strength and resilience. The future stretched out before him, bright and full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Evan felt ready to embrace it. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of Evan. A man who faced the ultimate betrayal but turned his pain into power and built a brighter future. This story is a reminder that even when life knocks you down, you have the strength to rise, rebuild, and thrive. So, what would you do if you were in Evan's shoes? Could you find the strength to walk away, or would you have handled things differently? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more jaw-dropping tales of betrayal, heartbreak, and revenge, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Unheard Stories. Make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And before you go, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter how tough things get, there's always a way to rebuild. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and I'll see you in the next story. Take care.